The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of Westfield Conservatory, turning the dust particles in the air into tiny floating stars. In the main recital hall, a small crowd of students had gathered, their formal concert attire now loosened and relaxed as they celebrated another successful spring showcase. Lily stood near the grand piano, her dark hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders. She held a glass of sparkling water, laughing at something one of her classmates had said. At 23, she was already being talked about as one of the most promising violin talents to emerge from the conservatory in years. "You were incredible tonight," said a voice behind her. Lily turned to see Ben, a fellow student from the composition department. His tie was undone, hanging loosely around his neck, and he looked at her with barely disguised admiration. "Thank you," she replied with a genuine smile, "though I messed up that transition in the third movement. I don't think anyone noticed, but I knew." "No one noticed," Ben assured her. "Everyone was too busy being blown away by everything else." Lily took a sip of her water, studying Ben over the rim of her glass. She'd known him for nearly 3 years now. He was talented, not brilliant, but dedicated and hard-working. And he had been asking her out for coffee for almost as long as they'd known each other. "You know," she said, setting her glass down on a nearby table, "my grandfather used to say that music reveals who we truly are, not just skill or technique, but what's in our hearts." Ben nodded eagerly. "That's so true. I've always believed that." "Have you finished that composition you were working on?" Lily asked. "The one for your final portfolio?" "Almost," he replied. "I'm still struggling with the final movement. I wanted to say something meaningful, you know, not just notes on a page." Around them, the party continued. A group of percussion students had gathered in one corner, using empty glasses and table edges to create an impromptu rhythm section. 2 vocal students were harmonizing by the refreshment table, their voices blending perfectly even in this casual setting. Lily watched it all with a sense of belonging. This was her world. Had been since she was 6 years old and first picked up a violin. The instrument had felt right in her hands from the beginning, like it had been waiting for her. "I've been thinking," Ben said, interrupting her thoughts. "Maybe we could collaborate on something. Your violin with my composition." Before Lily could respond, several students nearby called out to her. "Lily, we need a ruling on this debate." She raised an eyebrow at Ben. "Duty calls." "Hold that thought." Walking over to the small group by the windows, Lily found herself in the middle of a heated but good-natured argument about which composer had written the most technically challenging pieces for strings. "It has to be Paganini," insisted a cello student. "His caprices are basically impossible." "No way," countered another student. "Try playing some late Beethoven string quartets and tell me those aren't more complex overall." Lily listened, amused by their passion. These were the conversations that happened nowhere else but in places like this. Intense debates about musical minutiae that would seem bizarre to outsiders. "What do you think, Lily?" someone asked. "You destroyed that Tchaikovsky tonight." She was about to answer when she noticed an older man quietly moving around the edges of the room, collecting empty cups and napkins. He wore the gray uniform of the conservatory's maintenance staff, and most students barely registered his presence as he worked. But something about him caught Lily's eye, the way he moved in time with the rhythm the percussion students were creating, almost imperceptibly, as if music lived in his body whether he intended it or not. "I think," Lily said, raising her voice slightly, feeling suddenly playful, "that true musicianship isn't about technical difficulty at all. It's about making people feel something they've never felt before." Her words carried across the room, causing several conversations to pause. She felt a rush of confidence, the same feeling she got when performing a particularly challenging passage perfectly. "Is that why we're all here?" she continued, now addressing the whole room. "To master difficult pieces? Or to create something that moves people?" Ben had made his way over to her, clearly eager to be part of whatever was happening. "It's both, isn't it?" he offered. "Technical skill in service of emotion." Lily spotted a piano in the corner of the room, not the main performance grand, but a smaller upright used for rehearsals. On impulse, she walked toward it, and the crowd of students naturally followed, sensing a moment unfolding. "I'll tell you what," she said, feeling the eyes of everyone on her. "Play something, anything, that truly moves me, and I will marry you." She laughed as she said it, the challenge clearly playful, but there was a spark of something real beneath her words. Her grandfather had always told her to marry someone whose music spoke to her soul. "When you hear the right person play," he'd said, "you'll know." The room erupted in laughter and excited chatter. Several students immediately moved toward the piano, eager to take up the challenge. "Are you serious?" asked a voice from the crowd. "Absolutely," Lily said with a dramatic flourish. "My hand in marriage for whoever can play something that makes me feel everything." She clutched her chest theatrically, drawing more laughter. A piano performance major cracked his knuckles and sat down first. He launched into a technically flawless rendition of a Chopin etude, his fingers flying over the keys with precision. It was impressive, everyone in the room knew that. But when he finished, Lily just shook her head. "Beautiful," she said, "but my heart is unmoved." Next came a jazz studies student who improvised a complex blues progression that had people nodding appreciatively. Again, Lily applauded but declared herself unaffected on a soul level. One by one, students took turns at the piano. Some played classical pieces, others original compositions. One brave soul even attempted a piano version of the violin concerto Lily had performed earlier that evening. Each performance was met with applause, commentary, and laughter, but Lily maintained her stance. She remained unmarried material. Through it all, Ben watched anxiously from the side. He was a composer more than a performer, and while he could play piano competently, he knew he couldn't match the technical skills of the performance majors. Still, as the night wore on and the crowd began to thin, he gathered his courage. "I'd like to try," he said quietly to Lily. She smiled encouragingly. "Of course." Ben sat at the piano, took a deep breath, and began to play. It wasn't a famous piece or a technical showcase. Instead, it was something he had composed himself but never shared. A simple, heartfelt melody that grew more complex as it progressed. He played with his eyes closed, his whole body swaying slightly with the music. When he finished, the room was quiet. He looked up at Lily, hope written across his face. She walked over and placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "That was beautiful, Ben, really. It's the closest anyone's come tonight." She paused. "But I'm afraid I'm still not quite ready for marriage." She softened her words with a kind smile. The party began to break up soon after. Students drifted away in small groups, heading back to dorm rooms or apartments, still buzzing from the performances both on the formal stage earlier and the impromptu ones just now. "Sorry about putting you on the spot," Lily said to Ben as they walked together toward the exit. "I got carried away." "Don't be sorry," he replied. "It was fun, and I'll keep trying, you know." There was a lightness in his voice that suggested he understood the marriage challenge hadn't been entirely serious, but the desire to create music that moved her was very real. As they reached the door, Lily realized she'd left her violin case in the recital hall. "You go ahead," she told Ben. "I need to grab my violin." She made her way back through the now empty rooms, her footsteps echoing slightly. The maintenance man was still there, now mopping the floor where someone had spilled a drink. He nodded politely as she passed. In the recital hall, Lily collected her violin case and was about to leave when she paused. The grand piano stood silent and majestic in the center of the stage, bathed in a single security light. On impulse, she walked over and ran her fingers lightly over the keys, not pressing hard enough to make a sound. "Good night," she whispered to the empty hall, to the piano, to the music that always lived inside these walls. As she turned to leave, she didn't notice the maintenance man standing in the shadows of the doorway, watching her with quiet intensity. Nor could she know that he had overheard the entire piano challenge from earlier, or that his hands, rough now from years of labor, had once created music that could have answered her challenge in ways none of the students had come close to achieving. The next day would be ordinary. Classes, practice, more practice. But something had been set in motion that evening. Something that would eventually change Lily's life in ways she couldn't imagine. The challenge had been issued in jest, but somewhere in the universe it had been taken seriously. And very soon, when the custodian finally sat down at that piano, everything would change. The morning light filtered through the high windows of Westfield Conservatory, casting long rectangles of sunshine across the polished floor. Anton moved his mop carefully around these patches of light, as if not wanting to disturb them. At 58, he had been the custodian here for 15 years. his tall frame now slightly stooped from years of bending to clean under chairs and desks. The building was quiet this early. Most students wouldn't arrive for another hour or two, which was precisely why Anton preferred the early shift. The solitude gave him space to work, to think, and sometimes, when he was certain he was alone, to remember. He paused his mopping when he reached the recital hall. The door was slightly ajar, and he pushed it open with the handle of his mop. Inside, the grand piano still sat center stage where it had been during last night's party. A coffee cup had been left on its polished surface, a cardinal sin in Anton's book, regardless of whether you were a student or faculty member. Moving quickly across the room, he retrieved the cup and wiped away the faint ring it had left behind. His hands moved with surprising grace for someone who spent his days scrubbing floors and emptying trash cans. Long fingers, knuckles slightly swollen with age, caressed the piano's surface with something like reverence. Anton glanced around the empty hall, listening carefully. Satisfied he was alone, he set down his cleaning supplies and gently lifted the piano's cover. The keys gleamed up at him, black and white, a language he had once been fluent in. He didn't sit, he never did, but he allowed himself to press one key so softly it barely made a sound. Middle C. The note hung in the air for a brief moment before dissolving into silence. Who taught you that playing a piano requires standing up? The voice startled him so badly he slammed the cover down harder than intended, wincing at the sharp bang it made. Turning, he saw Professor Chen standing in the doorway, arms crossed but expression amused rather than accusatory. I wasn't playing, Anton said quickly, reaching for his mop. Just checking for dust. Professor Chen walked toward him, her small figure commanding the space despite her size. As the head of the piano department, she was both feared and adored by students. Anton had cleaned her office for years but had rarely exchanged more than polite greetings with her. With one finger on middle C. She raised an eyebrow. That's a very specific dust-checking technique. Anton felt heat rise to his face. I should get back to work. Wait, she said, her voice softening. I've seen you, over the years. The way you listen during rehearsals. The way your hands move sometimes when you think no one's watching, like you're playing along. Anton stared down at his cleaning cart, suddenly finding the arrangement of spray bottles fascinating. You were a pianist once, weren't you? She asked. The question hung in the air between them. Anton hadn't spoken about his past to anyone at the conservatory. It was easier that way, cleaner like the floors he polished every day until they gleamed. It was a long time ago, he finally said, his accent thickening slightly as it always did when he was emotional. Another life. Professor Chen nodded slowly. Music is never another life. It's always this one. She gestured to the piano. Play something for me. Anton shook his head firmly. I have to finish the East Wing before students arrive. The East Wing has been there for 100 years. It can wait 10 minutes. When he still hesitated, she added, Consider it a favor to me. I've had a difficult morning and could use something beautiful. Anton looked at her, then at the piano, then down at his hands, working hands now, calloused and rough. But beneath the skin, the muscles remembered. They always remembered. Slowly, reluctantly, he sat down at the bench. His uniform felt suddenly constricting, and he was acutely aware of the janitor's keys jangling at his hip. But when his fingers touched the keys, something inside him shifted like a door long shut creaking open. He began to play. Not a showy piece, but something gentle, a Chopin nocturne he had once known by heart. The first few notes came hesitantly, mistakes peppering the phrases. But soon his fingers remembered their old paths, and the music began to flow more naturally. It was like speaking a language he had not used in years, rusty at first, but still there, buried in the deepest part of him. As he played, he forgot about Professor Chen watching. He forgot about his uniform, his mop waiting nearby, the students who would soon fill these halls. For a few minutes, he was just Anton and the piano, having a conversation they had put off for far too long. When he finally finished, the last notes lingering in the air, he kept his head bowed over the keys. The silence that followed seemed heavier than before. You were conservatory trained, Professor Chen said. It wasn't a question. Anton nodded once, still not looking up. Moscow? Warsaw? Budapest, he replied. A long time ago. And now you clean floors. There was no judgment in her voice, just a quiet curiosity. Anton finally looked up at her. Now I clean floors, he agreed. And it's a good life. Honest work. Professor Chen studied him for a long moment. You heard the students last night, didn't you? The girl who challenged everyone to move her with their playing. A flicker of a smile crossed Anton's face before he could suppress it. I hear everything in this building. The walls talk to me while I clean. That girl Lily, she's one of our best. Stubborn and dramatic sometimes, but genuine talent. Professor Chen tapped her fingers against her leg, thinking, she's struggling with a piece right now. The Tchaikovsky violin concerto. She plays all the notes perfectly, but there is no color, Anton finished for her. No life beneath the perfection. Professor Chen's eyes widened slightly in surprise. Yes, exactly. Anton stood up from the piano bench, straightening his uniform. I really should get back to work. Of course. Professor Chen stepped aside, but as Anton collected his cleaning supplies, she added, You know, I could use some help with the piano studio this semester. Some of my students could benefit from a different perspective. Anton froze, mop in hand. I'm not a teacher. Neither were any of us until we taught our first student. She handed him a card. My office hours are on here. Think about it. With that, she left him alone in the recital hall. Anton slipped the card into his pocket without looking at it, then resumed his mopping, his movements more mechanical than before. The rest of the day passed in its usual rhythm. Anton cleaned classrooms, bathrooms, hallways. He nodded politely to students and faculty who passed him, most of whom barely registered his presence. He ate his lunch alone in the small break room designated for maintenance staff, reading a dog-eared paperback while he chewed his sandwich. But something had changed. The conversation with Professor Chen had stirred up memories he'd worked hard to keep settled, like dust under a rug. As he worked, snippets of music kept playing in his head. Not just the Chopin he'd played that morning, but other pieces, his pieces, the ones he'd once lived and breathed. Late in the afternoon, as he was emptying trash cans in the practice rooms, he heard someone playing the violin. The sound was coming from the last room in the hallway, its door slightly ajar. He recognized the music immediately. Tchaikovsky, the same concerto Professor Chen had mentioned. Moving quietly down the hall, Anton paused outside the practice room. Through the crack in the door, he could see Lily, the girl from last night. Her eyes were closed as she played, her technique flawless as her bow flew across the strings. Yet something was missing, just as Professor Chen had said. The notes were perfect but hollow, like beautiful empty shells washed up on a shore. Anton found himself listening intently, not moving away as he usually would. When she reached a particularly difficult passage and fumbled it, he heard her curse under her breath. She tried again and again, growing more frustrated each time. Finally, she lowered the violin and bowed to her sides. Why won't you speak to me? She asked the empty air, her voice tight with emotion. Without thinking, Anton pushed the door open slightly. Because you're not listening to what it's trying to say. Lily whirled around, startled. When she saw it was just the custodian, her surprise turned to embarrassment, then irritation. Excuse me? Anton immediately regretted speaking. I'm sorry. I was just collecting trash. He gestured to the bin in the corner of the room. No, what did you mean? Lily asked, curiosity overcoming her initial reaction. About not listening. Anton hesitated. He should just take the trash and leave, return to his invisible existence within these walls. But something in her frustrated expression reminded him of himself long ago. The way you play, he said carefully. You're asking the music to do what you want. But sometimes you must let the music tell you what it needs. Lily stared at him, violin still in hand. Do you play? I clean, Anton replied, moving to take the trash bin. But I listen too. Everyone here plays. Few listen. He headed for the door, bin in hand. Sorry to interrupt your practice. Wait, Lily called after him. What's your name? He paused at the doorway. For a moment he considered not answering. It would be simpler, cleaner. But instead he turned slightly. Anton, he said. My name is Anton. With that he left, continuing his rounds through the building. But as he worked, he found himself thinking about Lily's playing, about the Tchaikovsky concerto, about all the things he might have said if he'd allowed himself to. He thought about Professor Chen's card still in his pocket. And for the first time in many years, Anton let himself wonder if perhaps the past wasn't quite as buried as he'd believed it to be. The following week brought steady rain to the city, drumming against the conservatory's high windows and providing a constant backdrop of white noise throughout the building. Anton found himself paying special attention to the recital hall, making excuses to check the piano multiple times a day. He told himself it was to ensure no water leaked through the old ceiling onto the expensive instrument. He knew this wasn't the whole truth. After his encounter with Lily, he had taken extra care to stay invisible, to blend into the background as he had for 15 years. Yet he found himself lingering near the practice rooms during her scheduled times, ears catching the distinctive sound of her violin among the cacophony of instruments that filled the building daily. The Tchaikovsky still troubled her. He could hear it in the way she attacked certain passages, in the frustrated silences that followed difficult sections. Sometimes he would pause outside her door, mop in hand, listening to her struggle with the same phrase over and over again. Each time he forced himself to move on before she might notice him there. On Thursday afternoon, Anton was polishing the wooden banisters of the main staircase when he heard Professor Chen's voice calling to him from the landing above. "Anton. Just the man I was looking for." He looked up, cloth in hand. "Something need cleaning, Professor?" She descended the stairs, elegant as always in her tailored black outfit. "You never came to see me," she said, dispensing with small talk entirely. "About the piano studio position. I told you I'm not a teacher." "Yes, I remember." She waved a dismissive hand. "But you are a custodian, correct?" Anton frowned slightly, unsure where she was leading. "Yes. The practice room pianos need maintenance. Regular tuning, of course, but also cleaning of the mechanisms. Our regular piano technician is overwhelmed with the performance hall instruments. I've secured a small budget to have someone focus on just the practice room pianos." She looked at him pointedly. "Someone who understands pianos from the inside out." Anton's hands tightened on his polishing cloth. "I haven't tuned a piano in decades. Like riding a bicycle," she said with a smile. "And it would mean extra pay, of course." Before Anton could respond, they were interrupted by the sound of raised voices from the hallway below. Professor Chen sighed. "Think about it," she said before continuing down the stairs. Anton followed more slowly, curious about the commotion. In the main corridor, he found Lily engaged in a heated discussion with a young man he recognized from the party, the composition student who had played for her challenge. "You're not listening to me." "Ben," Lily was saying, frustration evident in her voice. "I don't need help with the notes. I need something else entirely." "I'm just offering to work through it with you," Ben replied, his tone pleading. "We could approach it together, maybe try some different interpretations." "That's just it," Lily said. "I don't want an interpretation. I want—" She trailed off, running a hand through her hair. "I don't even know how to explain what I want." Professor Chen approached them. "Everything all right here?" Both students straightened up immediately. "Yes, Professor," they said almost in unison. "Lily, I wanted to speak with you about your jury preparation," Professor Chen said. "Do you have a moment?" "Of course." Lily shot Ben an apologetic look before following Professor Chen down the hallway. Ben stood alone for a moment, shoulders slumped, before walking away in the opposite direction. Anton, who had been standing frozen on the stairs, finally descended completely and resumed his work, pretending he hadn't overheard the exchange. Later that evening, as the autumn sky darkened early outside, Anton was completing his final rounds before locking up. Most students had already left, but as he approached the recital hall, he heard the unmistakable sound of the piano being played. Tentatively, as if the player was searching for something, he approached quietly and peered through the half-open door. Lily sat at the grand piano, picking out a melody with one hand. On the bench beside her lay her violin case open but the instrument untouched. She wasn't really playing, more like questioning the piano, pressing keys experimentally, listening to each note as if it might contain a secret. Anton watched her for several minutes. Her frustration was palpable even from a distance. Finally, making a decision he knew he might regret, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. "The piano won't give you answers if you don't ask the right questions," he said softly. Lily jumped slightly, then relaxed when she saw who it was. "You again," she said, but there was no annoyance in her voice. "The listening custodian." "Anton," he reminded her, moving closer. "Anton," she repeated. Do you spy on all the students, or am I special? He smiled slightly. I clean all the rooms. But I don't listen to everyone, no. Lily regarded him curiously. You said something last time about letting the music tell me what it needs. What did you mean by that? Anton hesitated, then gestured to the violin case. May I? Lily nodded, and he carefully lifted the violin from its velvet bed. It was a beautiful instrument, probably worth more than he earned in several years. He held it with natural ease, examining it without touching the strings. This violin has a story, he said. Every instrument does. But also every piece of music has a story. When you play, you're not just performing notes on a page. You're telling that story. He handed the violin back to her. What is the story of Tchaikovsky's concerto? Do you know it? Lily took the violin, cradling it almost protectively. It was written in 1878, dedicated to Leopold Auer, who initially refused to play it because he thought it was too difficult. Anton shook his head. That's history, not story. I'm asking what Tchaikovsky was saying with this music. What was in his heart when he wrote it? Lily frowned. I don't know. Sadness, maybe? Beauty? He wrote it after fleeing a disastrous marriage, Anton said quietly. He was staying by a lake in Switzerland with his brother and his former student, whom he loved deeply. It was a time of great pain, but also freedom and relief. The concerto is full of longing, yes, but also liberation, joy breaking through sorrow. Lily stared at him. How do you know all this? Anton gave a small shrug. I told you I listen. Not just to music, but to its stories. He glanced at his watch. It's getting late. I need to lock up soon. Wait, Lily said quickly. Could you? Would you show me how to listen? To really hear what the music is saying? Anton looked at her for a long moment. This young woman with all her talent and promise asking him, a janitor, for guidance. It would be so easy to say no, to retreat back into his safe, invisible life. But the hunger in her eyes was so familiar, so much like what he had once felt. I'm here early, he said finally. Before classes. 6:30 until 8. The recital hall is empty then. Lily's face brightened. Tomorrow? Anton nodded once. Bring the Tchaikovsky. Just the violin part. Leave the sheet music at home. But how will I? If you need the notes on a page to play it, you don't really know it, Anton said. And if you don't really know it, you can't tell its story. The next morning, Anton arrived at the conservatory even earlier than usual. He completed his essential tasks quickly, then found himself drawn to the recital hall. The grand piano stood in the dim light, imposing and elegant. For years he had avoided really playing it, allowing himself only the occasional brush of fingers across keys when he was certain no one would hear. Now, after his conversation with Lily, after Professor Chen's offer, something was stirring inside him that had been dormant for too long. Anton sat down at the bench and began to play, really play, for the first time in years. He chose a piece he had once known better than his own heartbeat, Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor. His fingers were stiff at first, the muscles unused to the demands of the piece. But gradually, like a stream thawing after winter, the music began to flow more naturally. He was so absorbed that he didn't notice Lily enter the hall, violin case in hand. She stood silently at the back, watching as this man, whom she had barely noticed before last week, transformed before her eyes. His back straightened, his face softened, and his hands moved across the keys with a grace that belied his usual stooped posture. When he finished, the final chord still resonating in the air, she couldn't help but gasp softly. Anton's head jerked up, his momentary freedom instantly replaced by embarrassment. He stood abruptly from the bench. You're early, he said, his voice gruff. And you're incredible, Lily replied, walking toward him with wide eyes. Why are you mopping floors when you can play like that? Anton's expression closed. We're here to work on your Tchaikovsky, not my past. Lily looked like she wanted to argue but thought better of it. She removed her violin from its case and stood ready. All right then, teacher. I'm here to listen. Something in the way she said teacher made Anton both uncomfortable and oddly proud. He gestured for her to begin. Play the opening, he instructed. But before you start, tell me, what is the first thing the violin says in this concerto? What feeling, what message? Lily positioned her violin under her chin, thinking. Loneliness, she said finally. It starts alone without the orchestra. A voice in the wilderness, Anton nodded. Good. Now play that loneliness. Not the notes, the feeling. And as the first light of dawn broke through the high windows of the recital hall, Lily began to play and Anton began to teach, both of them stepping into roles they hadn't known they were missing. The early morning sessions with Anton quickly became the most important part of Lily's day. For 3 weeks, they met in the quiet recital hall before the conservatory came to life with students and faculty. Sometimes they would work for the entire 90 minutes on just a few measures of the Tchaikovsky, breaking down each phrase until Lily understood not just the notes but the emotion behind them. Again, Anton would say, leaning against the piano. But this time, think about why Tchaikovsky wrote this passage. What was he trying to say here? Lily would close her eyes, breathe deeply, and play again. Each time, the music became less mechanical, more alive. Anton rarely demonstrated on the piano during these sessions, preferring to guide with words and occasionally humming a phrase to show the shape he was looking for. But when he did play, Lily found herself mesmerized by the transformation that came over him, how his entire being seemed to change, becoming both more powerful and more vulnerable at the same time. "Who were you before you came here?" she asked him one morning after he had played a particularly moving excerpt from the orchestral part. Anton's hands stilled on the keys. "Someone who took music for granted," he said finally. "Someone who didn't understand its true value until it was gone." Lily wanted to press further, but something in his expression warned her not to. Instead, she picked up her violin again. "Show me once more how that middle section should feel." Outside these morning sessions, they maintained a careful distance. In the hallways, Anton was just the custodian again, nodding politely as he passed. Lily respected this boundary, though sometimes she caught herself watching him as he worked, noticing the musicality in his movements even when he was simply mopping a floor or polishing a banister. Professor Chen was the only one who seemed to understand what was happening. One afternoon, she stopped Lily after class. "Your playing has changed," she said, her sharp eyes studying Lily's face. "There's a depth to it now that wasn't there before. A maturity." Lily shifted her weight, unsure how much to reveal. "I've been listening differently." A small smile touched Professor Chen's lips. "Would this new way of listening have anything to do with our custodian?" Lily's surprised expression was answer enough. Anton Lazarov was once considered one of the most promising pianists to come out of Eastern Europe, Professor Chen said quietly. "Before the political upheaval, before he had to flee, I recognized his name when he applied for the custodian position all those years ago. But he made it clear he wanted no acknowledgement of his past. I've respected his wishes." She paused. "Until now." "He was a concert pianist?" Lily asked, though deep down she had already guessed something like this. More than that. He was a true artist, the kind that comes along rarely. Professor Chen gathered her sheet music from the stand. "Whatever he's teaching you, Lily, treasure it. Some knowledge can only be passed directly from one musician to another, never written in books or taught in classes." As the fall semester progressed, word began to spread among the students about Lily's improved playing. Her violin professor noticed it too, commenting on the new emotional depth in her interpretation. When asked about the change, Lily would simply say she had been practicing differently, not ready to share the truth about her early morning sessions. Ben noticed the change as well. He cornered Lily one day after theory class, his expression a mix of admiration and confusion. "I heard you practicing yesterday," he said. "The Tchaikovsky. It was different. Amazing, actually." "Thanks," Lily replied, genuinely pleased. "I've been working hard on it." "With who?" Ben asked. "You've never played it like that before. Someone must be helping you." Lily hesitated. "Just trying some new approaches," she said evasively. Ben's face fell slightly. "You don't trust me enough to tell me?" "It's not that," Lily said quickly. "It's just complicated." "Everything with you is complicated," Ben muttered. Then with visible effort, he brightened. "Hey, I finished my composition. The one for my portfolio. Would you listen to it sometime? Tell me what you think." The hopeful look in his eyes made Lily smile. "Of course I will. Tomorrow?" Ben suggested. "After your last class? I could play it for you in the small recital room." Lily agreed, though as she walked away, she found herself thinking less about Ben's composition and more about her next lesson with Anton. He had promised to show her how the violin and piano Parts in the Tchaikovsky were meant to converse with each other, like two voices telling different parts of the same story. The next morning, Lily arrived at the recital hall to find it empty. She waited, practicing scales to warm up, but Anton never appeared. It was the first time he had missed one of their sessions. Disappointed but not overly concerned, she assumed he must have had some custodial emergency to handle. Later that day, however, when she caught no glimpse of him in the hallways, she began to worry. After her final class, instead of going directly to meet Ben, she detoured to the maintenance office in the basement of the building. The head of maintenance, a gruff woman named Pat, looked up from her desk when Lily knocked on the open door. "Anton isn't here today," Pat said before Lily could even ask. "Called in sick this morning. First time in about 5 years, so he must be really under the weather." "Oh," Lily said, surprised. Do you know where he lives?" "I borrowed some sheet music from him," she lied, "that I really need for a performance." Pat gave her a skeptical look. "Anton doesn't lend out sheet music, but he does live in that old apartment building on Maple Street. Number 24, I think. Not that I'm telling you to go bother a sick man," she added with a pointed stare. Lily thanked her and hurried away, mind racing. She should go to meet Ben, she had promised after all. But something felt wrong about Anton's absence, especially after their intense work together over the past weeks. Making a quick decision, she texted Ben. Something came up. Family emergency. "Can we reschedule for tomorrow?" "So sorry." Then she headed for Maple Street, stopping at a small grocery store to pick up soup and tea, the universal offerings for someone who was ill. Anton's building was older than she expected, a slightly shabby walk-up with no elevator. She climbed to the second floor and found apartment 24 at the end of a dimly lit hallway. Taking a deep breath, she knocked on the door. No answer came. She knocked again, louder. Still nothing. "Anton?" she called. "It's Lily, I brought soup." Finally, she heard slow footsteps approaching the door. It opened just a crack and Anton's face appeared. He looked pale, his usual neat appearance replaced by rumpled clothes and uncombed hair. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice rough. "You weren't at our session this morning." "I was worried." Lily held up the grocery bag. "I brought soup." Anton sighed, then opened the door wider to let her in. The apartment was small but tidy, with bookshelves lining one wall. What caught Lily's eye immediately, however, was the upright piano in the corner, not an expensive instrument, but well-maintained. "You have a piano," she said, stating the obvious. "Yes." Anton moved slowly to the small kitchen area. "But I rarely play it." "Are you really sick?" Lily asked, following him. Anton filled a kettle and set it on the stove before answering. "Not in the way you're thinking." He gestured to a calendar hanging on the refrigerator. A date was circled in red, today's date. "Today is the anniversary of when I left my country, when I lost everything." Lily set her grocery bag on the counter. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Professor Chen told me a little. About who you were before." Anton's expression darkened. "Professor Chen should mind her own business. She respects you," Lily said. "She only told me because she saw how my playing had changed since we started working together." The kettle began to whistle. Anton poured water into 2 mugs, his movements deliberate, as if requiring great concentration. "Every year on this day I allow myself to remember," he said. "To grieve for the life I lost. Tomorrow I will go back to being just the custodian." Lily took the mug he offered her. "But you're not just the custodian." "Not to me," Anton met her eyes. "And what am I to you, Lily?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with something neither of them had acknowledged until now. Lily thought carefully before answering. "A teacher," she said. "The best I've ever had." A ghost of a smile touched Anton's lips. "High praise from a conservatory student." "It's true." Lily gestured to the piano. "Will you play for me?" "Just once here where no one else can hear." Anton looked at the piano as if it were both an old friend and a dangerous enemy. "What would you like to hear?" "Something of yours," Lily said. "Something you wrote back when you were—" She trailed off, unsure how to finish. "Back when I was Anton Lazarov, the pianist," he said. "Not Anton the janitor." He set down his mug and moved to the piano, running a hand along its top before sitting down. "I wrote this the year before I left," he said. "It was to be part of a larger work, but I never finished it." And then he began to play, and Lily understood for the first time who he truly was. The music that filled the small apartment was like nothing she had ever heard. Complex yet accessible, deeply emotional, yet structurally perfect. It told a story of homeland, of belonging, of impending loss. When the final notes faded, Lily realized she had tears on her cheeks. Anton sat motionless at the piano, hands still resting on the keys. That should exist in the world, she said finally. People should hear it. Anton shook his head. That part of my life is over. Why? Lily challenged. Because you decided it was? Or because you're afraid? Anton turned to face her, a flash of anger in his eyes. You know nothing about fear, Lily. Real fear. Maybe not, she admitted. But I know about music. And hiding this, she gestured to the piano, is wrong. It's like locking away something beautiful that belongs to everyone. They looked at each other for a long moment, teacher and student both suddenly unsure of their roles. The soup will get cold, Anton said finally, standing up from the piano bench. And you should go. I'll see you tomorrow morning, same time. Lily wanted to argue, to push harder, but something told her this wasn't the moment. Instead, she nodded and moved toward the door. Thank you for playing for me, she said, pausing with her hand on the doorknob. I won't forget it. The end-of-semester showcase was the conservatory's most important event, where students performed for faculty, family, donors, and occasionally talent scouts from prestigious orchestras and music organizations. For seniors like Lily, it was more than just another recital. It was a potential launching pad for their careers. 2 days before the showcase, Lily and Anton were in the recital hall for what would be their final early morning session. After her visit to his apartment, something had shifted in their relationship. Anton had become more open about his past, sharing stories of his training and career in Budapest. In return, Lily had confided her fears about the future, her worry that technical proficiency alone wouldn't be enough to stand out in the fiercely competitive world of classical music. Play it one more time, Anton said, leaning against the piano as Lily prepared to run through the cadenza of the Tchaikovsky. Remember what we talked about? This is the moment when the violin stands alone, telling the most personal part of the story. Lily nodded, tucking the violin under her chin. Over the weeks of working with Anton, her playing had transformed. Notes that were once merely correct were now alive with color and meaning. She closed her eyes and began to play, losing herself in the music. When she finished, the final notes still hanging in the air, she opened her eyes to find Anton watching her with an expression that combined pride and something deeper. More complex, beautiful, he said softly. You found it. The heart of the music. Because of you, Lily replied, lowering her violin. I couldn't have done this without you. Anton shook his head. I only showed you the door. You walked through it yourself. He glanced at his watch. I should get back to work. People will be arriving soon. Lily began carefully packing up her violin. Will you be at the showcase? Of course, Anton said, picking up his cleaning supplies. I'll be making sure the stage is spotless before everyone arrives. That's not what I meant, Lily said. Will you be there to hear me play? Anton paused. I'm always listening, Lily, even when you don't see me. With that, he left, the door closing quietly behind him. Lily stood alone in the recital hall, a strange emptiness filling her chest. Their time together was coming to an end, she realized. Once the showcase was over, once the semester ended, there would be no reason for these early morning sessions. The thought bothered her more than she expected. Later that day, as Lily was leaving her music theory class, Ben caught up with her in the hallway. He had been distant since she'd canceled their meeting to go to Anton's apartment, though she'd listened to his composition the next day as promised. Hey, he said, falling into step beside her. Ready for the showcase? As ready as I'll ever be, Lily replied with a small smile. Your piece is coming along well, too. Ben had been selected to have one of his original compositions performed at the showcase, a significant honor for a student composer. A quartet of faculty members would be playing it. Thanks, he said. Listen, there's something I wanted to ask you. He hesitated, then plunged ahead. There's a reception after the showcase. Would you like to go together? As my date? Lily blinked in surprise. After all this time, after all the coffee invitations she'd gently declined, Ben was still trying. There was something touching about his persistence. Ben, Just as friends if you want, he added quickly. No pressure. Lily thought about it for a moment. Okay, she said finally. As friends. That would be nice, Ben's face lit up. Great. I'll meet you backstage after the performances. He squeezed her arm lightly before hurrying off to his next class. Lily continued down the hallway, her thoughts turning from Ben back to Anton and their final session that morning. There was so much more she wanted to learn from him, so much more she wanted to know about the man behind the custodian's uniform, but he had been clear from the beginning that their arrangement was temporary, focused on preparing her for the showcase and nothing more. The night of the showcase arrived with all the nervous energy and excitement that accompanied major conservatory events. The recital hall was filled to capacity, the audience a sea of expectant faces under soft lighting. Backstage, students paced and practiced last-minute phrases, instruments and sheet music clutched in sweaty hands. Lily peered through the curtain at the crowd, scanning for a familiar face. She spotted Professor Chen in the front row, alongside other faculty members. Her parents had been unable to make the trip but had promised to watch the live stream. There was no sign of Anton, but then she hadn't really expected him to be sitting in the audience. Ben was scheduled to have his composition performed first, followed by several other students. Lily would be one of the last to perform, a prime spot that reflected the faculty's high expectations. As she waited, Lily found herself thinking about the challenge she had playfully issued all those weeks ago at the party. Play something that truly moves me and I will marry you, she had said with a laugh. So much had changed since then. She had learned what it really meant for music to move someone, to speak directly to their soul. Anton had taught her that, had shown her through his own playing what it meant to truly communicate through an instrument. The showcase began. Ben's composition was well received, the audience applauding appreciatively as he took a bow alongside the faculty quartet. Several other impressive performances followed, each student showcasing years of dedicated study and practice. Finally, it was Lily's turn. As she walked onto the stage, violin in hand, she felt an unusual calm. The weeks of work with Anton had given her a confidence that went beyond technical preparation. She knew this music now, not just the notes, but its heart. The pianist, a graduate student assigned to accompany her, nodded that he was ready. Lily raised her violin and began to play. From the first note, she could feel that something was different. The music flowed through her with an intensity she had never experienced before. Each phrase told its story perfectly, the loneliness, the yearning, the joy breaking through pain. When she reached the cadenza, she closed her eyes, remembering Anton's words. This is where you stand alone and speak your truth. As she played the final notes and the audience burst into applause, Lily felt tears on her cheeks. She bowed, overwhelmed by the emotional journey of the piece and the realization that her time learning from Anton had truly ended. Backstage, fellow students congratulated her, many commenting on the remarkable evolution of her playing. Ben was waiting with a bouquet of flowers, his face glowing with admiration. That was incredible, he said, handing her the flowers. I've never heard you play like that before. Thank you, Lily said, accepting the bouquet with a smile. Your composition was wonderful too. Ready for the reception? Ben asked, offering his arm. Lily hesitated. Actually, there's something I need to do first. Can I meet you there? Ben looked disappointed but nodded. Sure, don't be too long. As the crowd began to filter out toward the reception hall, Lily made her way through the backstage area to the service corridors where she knew Anton would likely be working. She found him in a small storage room, organizing chairs that had been used for additional seating. You should be at the reception, he said when he saw her, continuing his work, celebrating your success. I wanted to thank you first, Lily said, stepping into the room. Did you hear it? Anton nodded. Every note. And? She asked, suddenly nervous for his assessment. A rare, full smile spread across Anton's face. You told the story perfectly. It was... He seemed to search for the right word. Honest. Lily felt a rush of pride at his approval. It was because of what you taught me. No. Anton shook his head. The music was always in you, Lily. You just needed to find a way to let it out. He straightened up from his work. You should go join your friends now. This is your night to celebrate. Lily didn't move. I have a crazy idea, she said abruptly. The reception has a piano. Would you play something? Just one piece? Anton's expression clouded. You know I don't do that anymore. But you could, Lily insisted. You should. That piece you played for me in your apartment, people deserve to hear it. Lily, remember what I said that night at the party? She interrupted. Play something that truly moves me and I will marry you. It was a joke then, but... She took a deep breath. Your music moved me, Anton. It changed me. And while I'm not proposing marriage, she added with a small laugh, I'm asking you to stop hiding your gift. Anton was silent for a long moment. I'm not the pianist I once was, he finally said. My hands aren't as fast, as strong. But your heart is, Lily replied. And that's what people will hear. Their eyes met across the small room, student and teacher, both knowing they had become something more to each other, something neither of them had expected. One piece, Anton said quietly. For you. The reception was in full swing when they entered the elegant hall adjacent to the performance space. Students, faculty, and guests mingled around tables of refreshments, the buzz of conversation and occasional laughter filling the air. A grand piano stood in one corner, currently untouched. Heads turned as Anton walked in beside Lily, many students noticing for the first time the custodian they had passed in hallways for years without really seeing. Professor Chen, engaged in conversation with a donor, spotted them and excused herself to come over. Lily, that was a remarkable performance, she said, then turned to Anton with a knowing smile. I'm glad you could join us, Anton. He's going to play something, Lily said, her voice confident despite the flutter of nerves she felt. Professor Chen's eyebrows rose slightly, but her smile deepened. I was hoping you might. She turned and clinked a spoon against her glass, gradually bringing the room to silence. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special treat this evening. Many of you know Anton as part of our dedicated staff, but some of us have been privileged to know him as Anton Lazarov, once one of Europe's most promising concert pianists. A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd. Lily saw Ben across the room, his expression confused as he looked between her and Anton. He has graciously agreed to play for us tonight, Professor Chen continued, gesturing toward the piano. All eyes were on Anton as he made his way to the instrument. He was still in his work clothes, the gray uniform that had made him nearly invisible for 15 years. But as he sat down at the bench, something changed. His posture straightened. His hands hovered over the keys with natural authority, and suddenly, no one saw the custodian anymore. He began to play. The same piece he had played for Lily in his apartment, but somehow even more powerful in this space before this audience. The room fell completely silent, every person transfixed by the music filling the hall. Lily watched him, tears welling in her eyes again. This was what she had heard that first morning when she returned to the recital hall and found him at the piano. The soul of a true artist, hidden but never truly gone. When Anton finished playing, there was a moment of absolute silence before the room erupted in applause. People rose to their feet, many wiping away tears. Professor Chen was beaming, and even Ben was applauding enthusiastically, though his eyes kept darting to Lily with new understanding. Anton stood from the piano, acknowledging the applause with a small, humble nod. As the crowd pressed forward to speak with him, his eyes found Lily's across the room. In that look was a world of gratitude, a silent recognition that she had given something back to him just as he had given something to her. The custodian had sat down at the piano, and nothing would ever be the same again.